Today we're really faced with the good problem, but it is a problem nonetheless, of a whole bevy of new intraocular lenses with various claims about what that particular lens can do, and some of the technology that surrounds those lenses that allows those kinds of claims, to be made. And so it's curious as to how we really, as clinicians, look at that data and look at these claims that are being, based upon personal experience in many times, but sometimes not so heavily based upon data itself. And truly, I find myself confused many times as I look at the technologies that come out and say, okay, how is this different? How are the standards being met? And so on. What are some of the things that you look at, Morgan, for example, in terms of how you differentiate these and call to mind what you're anxious to use, maybe what you're not anxious to use, and what your experience has been with some of that?
Yeah, so we've seen that patients can get intermediate vision with monofocal lenses, but inconsistently so, right? Until we hit the ANSI criteria, that's where we get consistency. And with that, right, that's the split point. All right, so I can talk to a patient and let them know that I'm going to put a lens in their eye that's going to provide intermediate vision when I get into the EDOF category with Vivity, for example, but not when I'm talking about a monofocal. Now, they may get it, they may not. That's not new, though. We've seen that with lots of monofocal lenses over time. There's lots of data to support that, that patients do sometimes get intermediate vision with a monofocal IOL. So I don't think, at least recently, that the science has changed around this, but the marketing around this certainly has changed.
I mean, when I think about this range of offerings in this bigger monofocal group, I mean, the other side of inconsistency, as you guys have described it, is that there are anecdotes. You can have positive anecdotes. And one of the things that's candidly a little bit frustrating from a product development point of view is to see how anecdotes maybe tied to a nice technology story can become marketable. And I think that's why, for me, it's really important to just keep grounding ourselves in science that goes well beyond the anecdotes.
Absolutely.
And the one most gratifying aspect that I've always had is that when the science comes out and actually matches the clinical results, then that's a home run. Then you know that you actually are delivering what was expected. Unfortunately, too many times, what we hear about as it's coming out, especially as it is marketed, without necessarily all of the strict data, ends up in disappointment on the part of our patients when they really aren't able to deliver on what's been said is going to happen. And that unpredictableness, that inconsistency across the board really is disappointing, and what differentiates, I think, some of the technologies that we're talking about specifically with Vivity and what it really can deliver.
We hear a lot about monofocal IOLs and EDOF IOLs, but I think what's so important is consistency, right? That's what it comes down to, is consistency. When we're talking to patients about what to expect out of what to expect out of the lens, what do we tell a patient, right? Do we tell them you're going to get intermediate vision with this lens? Do we tell them you're just going to get distance? You're going to get both? What is it that we can tell a patient? And really, we have criteria for that. We have something that differentiates monofocal IOLs from EDOF IOLs, and that's the ANSI standards.
Right, yeah. So they're important, and I think you hit it exactly on the head, is that it's not just do they give excellent distance vision? That's part of the criteria, right? But you want to know, are they better than the monofocal lens? Because some monofocal lenses, as we know, will give, in certain patients, an expanded range of vision. So is it better? And then is it better in a few patients, occasionally, depending on your spherical aberration of your cornea or other criteria, maybe how big your pupil is? Or is it happening most of the time? And so the ANSI standards help us to say it's improving it over the monofocal lens at intermediate when it's distance corrected more than 50% of the time to a certain level, right? The 2032 level. So it's important because we want to know how to set expectations. That's how we come up with some happy patients. We tell them what we think we're going to achieve, and then when we achieve it, everybody's happy.
I mean, I think, as you guys said, the standards are absolutely key to consistency and expectations. The only other word that kind of always comes up for me is meaningfulness. We want to know, not only are we going to have when we choose an EDOF lens over a monofocal lens for a patient, or when a patient makes that choice, it's important not only that the outcome is consistent, but that it really is meaningfully better than the experience the patient would have had with a monofocal lens. And the ANSI standards really fundamentally do that. They define a bar that we can all point to that says, if you meet this bar, you have created a situation where there's going to be a meaningfully better experience for the patient that gets the lens.
And for the majority of patients too, because again, I think that one of the things that happens out there is that there is a patient here or there, even with a pure monofocal lens of the traditional variety, where they did see better, as we were alluding to earlier when we're talking about early ideation of monofocal lenses. Sometimes patients come back and they're like, "You said distance only, but I can see intermediate," and but that's not the routine patient. It's not the greater than average patient unless it's meeting the ANSI standards.
Right, and I think that's going to become more and more important as we hear this monofocal plus terminology more and more. We don't really have a definition for what monofocal plus is.
The one thing, the one word that resonates with me with these standards is differentiation. Without certain standards, there's really no way to differentiate one type of lens with the other. If there are not standards by which there can be differentiation between, let's say, a monofocal lens and a multifocal lens and an EDOF lens, what we end up with is chaos in that everybody is calling everything else something different, and confusion reigns. This differentiation is very important, and the ANSI standards provide that to give, again, both the doctors and the patients the ability to separate these one to another so that it becomes much more easily understandable and makes sense logically.
I would think that when it comes to ideation and refinement of when you're trying to design a lens, not having a standard to try to meet would make that more difficult as well. So when you have ANSI standards, that's what you're trying to meet, correct?
Exactly. I mean, it's a really good question, Morgan. What does monofocal plus mean? And maybe the situation will be different in the future. Maybe there will be a clear definition analogous to the ANSI standard that we have for EDOF. But today, I think all we can say that monofocal plus means is that it doesn't meet the ANSI standard for EDOF.
And at the end of the day, what I care most about is how can I counsel my patients? What can I tell my patients to expect? With consistency of outcome, and that's really what the ANSI criteria speak to. And when I put in Vivity, I can tell a patient they're going to get intermediate vision because I have the data and evidence to back that up.
No, I think that that's really important because it's one of the things that we hear sometimes out there in the market is, well, you can get this, your patient may experience some improvement in intermediate. And, may is a different expectation than we really think that this is highly likely to have the outcome that we're both discussing.
There are some patients who with a regular monofocal lens can get some range of vision, but it's unpredictable. A monofocal plus patient is, as we've talked about, a monofocal patient. And what that means is that some of the patients, some of the time, will get some effect. And that's an absolute true statement that I believe, but it's not predictable and it's not consistent along the entire range of patients that we see, and therefore it becomes a very difficult decision for doctors and for their patients to understand.
And I think one of the things about that too is that there's not a set of criteria that you can look to, at least not that we've identified, that says here's one of those select patients that with this monofocal plus technology is really going to get that benefit. So we're just sort of guessing that maybe there'll be a benefit there for those patients where when we have technology that can deliver over a wide range of patient characteristics, then we can feel more comfortable that it's going to deliver what we think. And that's what the EDOF ANSI criteria help to say, is that there's a wide range of patient particular characteristics, but you're likely to get the outcome with these patients.
The ANSI standard defines the bar or threshold of meaningfulness. And then the question becomes, am I going to use something that may be more complicated from a design point of view, maybe less predictable from a design point of view as it relates to the interaction of the design with the patient for something that is fundamentally not meaningful? Morgan, one of the things you mentioned was that you did see a 2.5 letter difference in distance corrected intermediate visual acuity, and you were very clear that that's below the defined threshold of clinical significance. I mean, I've, for better or worse, heard lots of passionate discussions about the importance of those 2.5 letters. I wonder if you might expound a little bit and give your own views on that finding and the importance or non-importance of those 2.5 letters.
Yeah, I mean it's a reasonable question. So really the kind of industry standard is a logmar 0.1. So one line of visual acuity is considered non-inferior if you're within one line. So this met non-inferiority by half of that standard, which is great. But 2.5 letters, when you're talking about 2.5 letters, it's not 2.5 letters consistently. That's the other side of it too, right? So we're still talking about intermediate vision in a monofocal IOL. So, I mean, we're not talking about an EDOF that meets ANSI criteria here.